All right, guys, today we're going to cover Unit 1, Basic Economic Concepts, Topic 1.2, which is the PPC, which is the Production Possibilities Curve. In this video, we're going to cover the efficiency and opportunity cost, the law of increasing opportunity costs, the shifters for the PPC, and then capital goods and future growth. Okay? All right, so now, what is the production possibilities curve, or the PPC? It's also known as the PPF, or the frontier, right? It's a model that's going to show you the alternative ways that an economy can use its scarce resources. Now, keep in mind when we're looking at this is just used in abstract. It's not really, there's not an office or economist with a bunch of PPCs all over their office and stuff like that. That's not what economists, they use this, right? But this is more for understanding the theory behind economics, right? And so what this model demonstrates for us is it demonstrates four things. It demonstrates scarcity, it shows us trade-offs, opportunity costs, and then it's going to show us efficiency. Now, there's four key assumptions in this model. One is that there's only two goods being produced in the society, which from there we already know that's, no society only produces two goods, right? So, but we have to assume that in this. We have full employment of resources, so everything that you're using is going to make either of these two goods, right? And then you have fixed resources, that's ceteris paribus. That's a Latin term that's used in economics quite a bit. And it's just, what we're looking at is what we're looking at, essentially. You're not going to take other outside things into account. And then technology is going to be fixed. Now, in the future, we're going to relax some of these assumptions. And the reason we're going to relax them is so that we can see some shifts and some movements along the PPC, or moving the PPC outward. Okay? So first thing we want to look at is something called a PPC table, or production possibilities table, right? And that table is going to give us the plot points, right, or where we're going to plot the points for our PPC. Now, if we're following along on my PowerPoint, you can see that on the PowerPoints that I use, you can see the bikes and computers being used, and that, so you have 14 bikes being produced, 0 computers being produced, 12 bikes being produced, 2 computers being produced. Point C is 9 bikes being produced, 4 computers being produced at that point, and then at point D, it's 5 bikes, 6 computers, and 0 bikes, and 8 computers at that point. Now, what we should do here is when we see this is we're going to go ahead and graph this out. Okay, so what I want you guys to do is on the y-axis, I want you to put bikes, and on the x-axis, I want you to put computers. Okay, so remember that the x-axis is going to be your horizontal curve, while your y-axis is going to be your vertical curve. Okay, so let's go ahead and graph that out here real quick. So your graph should look something like this, right? And just so we can see a few things. So here we have bikes on our vertical axis, computers on our horizontal axis. We have our different points. Point A represents that we'd be making 14 bikes and 0 computers. Point E represents that we're making 8 computers and 0 bikes. Now, when we look at this, anything inside of the graph, right, is going to be considered inefficient, right? When you're on the line, right, you are being what is called efficient, right? You're using all of your resources to that good. Now, there's two types of efficiency. There's productive efficiency and allocated efficiency, which we'll get to a little bit later, but just productive efficiency is anywhere on the curve, right? Allocated efficiency is what society essentially wants, right? Now, outside of the graph, you cannot produce anywhere outside of the graph. So let's say we have a point G here. This is unobtainable, right? Point X is going to represent unemployment, right? Or inefficient use of goods, okay? Now, why can we not get to point G? The reason why we can't get to point G is because we don't have enough parts for that particular, for this point, right? So let's say point G is going to represent, let's say, like 10 computers, right? And 14 bikes, right? Well, we don't have enough bike pedals to make more than 14, right? 14 is the most. We have 28 bike pedals, right? 2 per bike. So that's the most amount of bikes that we're able to produce. Now, keyboards, right? Like, let's say we only have enough plastic or whatever to make a keyboard. We only have enough to be able to produce 8. So that shows us or that's why we're not able to produce more than what we have. Now, can we get to be able to produce more? Yeah, of course, and then we'd have to shift out, which we'll get to a little bit later. Now, some other things that I want you to notice here is trade-offs, right? So let's say your society decides they're going to produce at point A. B, C, D, and E would be considered your trade-off, right? You're not picking any of these points. These are your other options that you could produce at, but your society just wants bikes, so they're going to be producing at point A, okay? And so other thing is your opportunity cost. So your opportunity cost is what does it cost you to move from, let's say, point B to point A? Well, you have given up 2 computers to go to point A, right? So here at point B, you're making 12 bikes and 2 computers. So you give up the 2 computers to get to point A. So your opportunity cost would be the two computers, okay? Now, let's go ahead and move on. So, and let's look more at opportunity cost. Now, if we were to move from point A to point B, we are giving up our opportunity cost. So moving from this point, right, point A to point B, you are giving up these 2 bikes right here, right? So that would be your opportunity cost. Now, moving from point B, right, point B to point D, what do you give up to get there? Well, you give up 7 bikes. Is that right? 12 to, maybe that's labeled wrong, but I think this is actually supposed to be a 5. So there we go. So you give up 7 bikes, right? And then let's move on to point D, and then moving from point D to point B. What do you give up there? Well, you're producing at point D, you're producing 6 computers, and at point B, you're producing 2 computers. So because you are producing 4 less computers, that's your cost for moving from point D to point B. Now, your opportunity cost for moving from point F, right, or point X, right, which is probably better represented over here, to point C, that would be 0 computers, because to move from here to here, you give up nothing, right? You're just being more efficient. So think about this inefficiency as like possibly you work at a power plant, right, that produces bikes or computers, right, either one, and you laid off a bunch of people, so you'd be producing at point X, but your boss decides that things are getting better and he wants to hire more people. Well, he hires more people, so you should be able to produce more, right? Your output should increase, or overtime, right? He offers overtime and people start producing more, and they go ahead and that would move you from point X to point C. Okay. And then, of course, out here, this point G, this is unattainable. We cannot get to that with the current state that we're in, right? With the what we have or the resources that we currently have. Okay. All right. So moving on, in the PPC, there's there is a type of PPC that is referred to as a straight line PPC. And that straight line just means that straight line or constant opportunity cost. It just means that the opportunity cost is going to be the same throughout the table, right? So if you're producing two goods that are very similar in resources, right, you would have a straight line PPC. So things that would be very similar, it'd be like, let's say, calzones and pizza, right? They use calzones are essentially a pizza that's wrapped up like a hot pocket, right? So for you can either make a calzone or you can make a pizza. So as you can see from the slide, right, on slide 13, you can see that it's going to, as you go through from point A to point B to point C, D, and E, as you go through, you're losing one of the other product, right? Again, a straight line is not very common, right? But you would see that the resources are very similar. Okay. Now let's take, for example, this is not a straight line PPC. This example would be more of what's called a law, or shows us the law of increasing opportunity cost. And what that is as you get away from producing bikes and producing more computers, you are giving up more and more bikes. So you give up more of any good. As you produce more of any good, the opportunity cost or the foregone production of the other good will increase, meaning that as you produce more computers, the bikes that you're losing out on should increase as you go, right? And that should produce a bowed out curve, right? Bow like a bow and arrow, right? As you can see, it kind of looks like a bow and arrow. It will produce that shape the more pronounced the law of opportunity cost is there. Okay. So just to kind of compare, a straight line PPC would look something like this, right? A straight line here, and let's say this is calzones, right? And this is pizza. Okay. And you've got that straight line as opposed to that bowed out curve, right? So like two grains, right? Wheat and maybe flour, right? Would be considered this, because you need very similar resources to produce those two products, right? This would be like bikes and computers, or possibly like you do bananas, and maybe like bananas and what grows out, avocados or something that's or jalapenos that are kind of grown out more in the desert area, right? Two different products that use different things, right? So like more your all right, so let's go ahead and move on. Now we're going to go ahead and relax the assumptions that we had discussed before, the fixed resources, right, and the fixed technology, and we're going to see how we can shift out our PPC. Now, there are three shifters, right? The three shifters for the PPC are going to be a change in resource quantity or quality, a change in technology, or a change in trade. And the change in trade is going to allow you to consume more of that good, right? So let's say we're trading with another country, right? Like we're trading with Mexico. We trade avocados, right? Now that we are trading avocados with Mexico for, let's say, and again, this is all kind of abstract, right? But just to get the idea of the concepts of economics, we trade coffee with Mexico. We're going to consume more avocados because avocados are obviously not grown that well in the United States, maybe in California, but avocados generally come from Mexico, right? And just kind of side note, because of NAFTA, our avocado consumption in the United States has increased quite a bit because of that trade agreement that we have with Mexico. So we're going to be able to consume more avocados because of the trade with Mexico. Now, let's see. Looking at quantity and quality of resources, if we're going to keep this PPC, right, this bowed out PPC here, what's going to happen to this PPC if we increase our population? Well, if we increase our population, we would see a a shift out for both computers and bikes, right? Because your quantity of resources and quality of resources should increase, right? Or at least quantity of resources. So your number of workers should increase from that, right? So you see that increase there. Now, what if there's an improvement in just the technology for computers, right? So now we're able to produce more computers more rapidly, right? Well, what's going to happen is you're going to see no increase in bikes, but an increase in computers, right? So you'll see a shift outward for just computers, and that'll stay the same there, right? So you're able to produce more bikes, and that'll be shown in something like that, right? Now, let's go ahead and go back to the idea of capital goods and future growth. Now, countries that produce more capital goods, right? Remember that capital goods help you produce more consumer goods, right? So if your society focuses more on, let's say, capital goods, you're going to be able to make more consumer goods, right? So your PPC should, you should see a big growth in your PPC, right? So here, if we were to change our PPC from, let's say, capital goods, right, and this is consumer goods, okay, you'd see a big growth in consumer goods, but a large growth in you'd see a big growth in capital goods, but a larger growth in consumer goods, right? Now, if your society just focuses on consumer goods, well, consumer goods cannot make capital goods, right? So you'd see a big growth in capital goods, but not so much in consumer goods. And your PPC should extend out further, right? It's better for countries to focus more on capital goods. And that just makes sense, right? Because your future PPC should be greater if you're making something that can make something else that people are going to consume, right? Now, that's going to be it for topic 2.1, production possibilities curve. Again, we covered efficiency, opportunity cost, law of increasing opportunity cost, the shifters for the PPC, capital goods, and future growth. Thank you guys. Have a good day.